Only 3 generations ago, and for millennia before that, it would have been impossible to live without horses. But even today, man and horse are made for each other, although now our partnership with horses only covers recreational activities. Now bridges must be rebuilt, because the wisdom that once grew up surrounding humans and horses, living and working together, is fading more and more from memory. These values cannot be protected like public monuments, and yet it is crucial to re-establish the ancient basic ethical concepts in our thinking and acting today. But what once went without saying must now be explicitly taught and learned. Traits and skills that are ultimately just as important for communicating with humans as they are for communicating with horses.
If horses could speak.
A contemplative stroll through the German Horse Museum in Verden on the River Aller. Memories of the intimate relationships between man and horse. From the classical era, the Parthenon frieze with youths beginning a wild ride to the Acropolis. What was the reason why people trained their horses? For military purposes, of course. This is the German Cavalry Riding Manual, filled with comprehensive regulations. Of course, in the history of equitation, dressage was largely oriented on military activities, which called for a large number of well-drilled horses in close formation. Outside the theater of conflict and death and blood in war, the interaction between human and horse was light-hearted and lively. Here is the Duchess Victoria Louise, a picture of elegance on her lady's side saddle. Another look at the past, to an era in which many riding masters developed all different kinds of riding theory, from 400 BC, when Xenophon, the Greek riding master, wrote his treatise on horsemanship, large parts of which are still completely valid to the present day. We recall the time of François Robuchon de la Guérinière, the Baroque era in which horses were still subjected to horrible tortures, although the school of suppleness had at last begun to take root. The growth of horse-related literature, witnessing the development of reflection on equitation, on horses, their character, their treatment, on dressage, on what horses can be taught, if enough time is devoted to the effort. As here, at the Spanish Court Riding School in Vienna, where there is still enough time to educate a horse. Long years of training to allow the horse to mature and gain true mastery of its skills. A German Olympic champion, Baron von Langen, summed up his guiding maxim: I love my horses and I show them I do, and my horses love me and they show me that they do. This is exactly what we saw in the Spanish Court Riding School, with its master riders in their dress suits and gold-trimmed cocked hats. With the school jumps, airborne training, so to speak, with all the things a horse beneath a rider can accomplish. And a horse like Olympic winner Kronos, who performed the most difficult dressage exercises with light suppleness. And the many, many riding masters whose rules should still be applied to modern horsemanship should be applied. Or are we on the wrong track? Or are we completely lost, moving in quite the wrong direction?
Chinese Olympics 2008, doping disaster. Dr. Hanfried Haring, General Secretary of the Federal Association for Horse Riding and Breeding. Now we have our own EPO. Lars Nyberg, double Olympic champion 1996-2000. This generation is destroying equestrianism. Denmark 2008, 6th of October. Dressage horse whipped hundreds of times. FN shocked over excessive punishment. Dressage trainer in court accused of cruelty to animals. Germany 2008, 24th of October. FN to appeal to International Sport Arbitration Court. Punishment decreed by World Federation against German champion is too lenient.
What you see here is not staged. This is everyday practice in countless clinics worldwide. I have been involved in this kind of thing for over 2 decades. It has become more and more clear that today's mechanized, reckless training methods have a direct connection with a great part of our veterinary work. At the center of classical equitation theory stands the psychologically and physically undamaged healthy horse. Where are the responsible veterinarians, judges, and functionaries? It is high time to stop giving in to commercial interests and to return to proven rules and principles. I grew up on my parents' farm, and from my earliest childhood, there were always horses around. At the age of 13, I began competition riding with my brothers and sisters. I began training for a career as a professional rider. I became a qualified riding groom, and then I went on to Munich to study veterinary medicine. Quite soon, I had to acknowledge that this somewhat reckless form of equitation had done some damage to my mare. Of course, I began to investigate what was wrong with my riding style, and this prompted me to look into classical dressage. Some 10 years ago, I joined the veterinary faculty at the German riding school and focused my studies on biomechanics and functional anatomy. The foundation for this was my clinical experience with show horses and my anatomical knowledge. I finally realized that today's equestrian sport is actually in opposition to classical dressage principles.
Goal and precepts of dressage. This goal can only be attained by maintaining and promoting a horse's natural aptitudes in order to let it develop a form and posture through which it can fully deploy its strengths. To understand these established principles, we must first concern ourselves with a few anatomical and biomechanical fundamentals. Only thus can we assess the often catastrophic physical effects inflicted on horses by careless training methods. Skeleton. Bridge construction.
The skeleton you see here comes from the stallion Foxtrot, which I also rode in my younger years. Over the past 10 years, Foxtrot's skeleton has served as a teaching aid at the German riding school. So even beyond his death, he helps us to explain classical dressage and illustrate biomechanics.
In this side view, it becomes clear that the body of a horse is constructed like a bridge. The thoracic and lumbar spine of an average-sized saddle horse carries a load of about 250 kilograms. This load is then considerably increased by the weight of the rider. How does the horse manage this? The nuchal ligament and the upper neck muscles have the most important biomechanical load-bearing function.
And so it is clearly the rider's responsibility to ensure that this upper neck system is appropriately positioned, putting the back into a positive tension so that the horse can carry the rider without damage.
Upper contraction system. Anatomical fundamentals. The nuchal ligament, shown here in blue, consists of the funiculus nuchae and the laminar portion. The funiculus portion of the nuchal ligament extends from the pole to the long spinous processes of the withers. The laminar portion of the nuchal ligament extends from the hood of the spinous processes of the withers to the cervical vertebrae. Thus, the entire head-neck axis is connected to the long spinous processes of the withers. The dorsal ligament runs from the withers backwards to the sacrum and is attached to all the spinal processes. The forces from the neck are conducted through these ligaments to the back, like a kind of suspension bridge. This ligament system is called the upper suspension.
The nuchal ligament and the upper neck musculature, the structural system of the upper neck, are crucial for lifting up the back, especially the supraspinous ligament. And this is the basic prerequisite for a horse to carry a rider without sustaining any damage. If one rides a horse making its neck very short, never mind whether it is set high or low, never mind whether it is a leg mover and its head is artificially held up or it is forced into a state of hyperflexion, the neck becomes extremely contracted, with corresponding effects on the nuchal ligament system marked in blue. This draws the spinal processes forward in a long neck. The system rotates forward about a fulcrum, tensing the nuchal ligament and raising the back. The more a horse is ridden by force and you see its rider applying the reins, the shorter the neck becomes. This reduces the tension in the upper neck system, and the ligament system no longer helps to carry the rider and the trunk weight.
Upper neck musculature. Biomechanics of the neck-back ligaments. The muscles of the upper neck are arranged in pairs around the nuchal ligament. They are arranged in different layers, connecting the head and neck with the shoulders and withers. The upper neck muscles lift the head and neck and help sustain the load of the back. A low neck position acts on the withers lever to raise the back. The spinal processes in the withers are drawn forward and raised by the pull of the nuchal ligament, thus tensing the supraspinous ligament. The more the neck is lifted, the less the supraspinous ligament helps to raise the back. Only the upper neck musculature can compensate for the loss of the effect of the nuchal ligament. This shows how important the head-neck position is for the entire static balance of the horse's body.
Extreme positions of the head-neck axis, for example, over-elevation or a state referred to as hyperflexion, lead to alterations in the dorsal biomechanics, causing the back either to sag so that it cannot be carried properly, or else it is subjected to extreme overtension.
Head-neck position. Relative elevation. A grazing horse can bear its trunk weight without strain, thanks to the upper suspension. This natural physical principle is of prime significance in classical equitation and is applied in relative elevation. Mainly through correct long-term training of the upper neck musculature, it is possible to compensate for the reduced effectiveness of the supraspinous ligament. So a great deal of the load-bearing function is performed by tensing the supraspinous ligament.
Thus the term relative elevation is derived from the progressive training of this upper neck muscle system, whereby the strengthening of this musculature enables the horse to maintain its back in a neutral position, even when the head and neck are raised up.
The long back muscle, anatomy and biomechanics. The long back muscle covers the entire back, from the lumbar spine to the cervical vertebrae. Its fibers run almost horizontally from the upper rear to the lower front. It is a locomotion muscle and works to lift the trunk. During walking and trotting, it contracts on one side and then the other. At a canter, these contractions occur almost simultaneously. In a correctly ridden horse, the long back muscle does not have to carry the rider. It remains supple and free for its proper function as a locomotion muscle.
The greatest misunderstandings among equestrians concern the function of the long back muscle. The long back muscle is actually a locomotion muscle, but many believe that it must be a load-bearing muscle because the saddle is placed on it and because they sit on it. The long back muscle runs horizontally, and of course it can only carry weight in a tensed-up condition, and overtension is damaging for any organism.
Broad dorsal fascia. Anatomy and biomechanics. The broad dorsal fascia is a ribbon-like structure which connects the long back muscle with the croup muscles, the hamstring musculature, and the broad back muscle. All the positive and negative states of tension in the back muscles influence the locomotion of both pairs of legs through the connecting dorsal fascia. Through the connecting effect of the large dorsal fascia, it is possible to distinguish whether a horse is being ridden as a so-called back mover or a leg mover. A back mover moves with a supple, smooth back, while a leg mover has a conspicuously over-tense back. An overstretched back always hinders the mechanics of the hind legs and brings the horse onto the forehand.
Like the back muscles, the abdominal muscles also have a locomotive function. They move the hind legs underneath the pelvis. They should not have to assume any trunk-bearing function on a well-ridden horse, but that is what they have to do with a leg mover. Because the line of the back is not carried with positive tension above the head-neck axis, the back sags and the horse's body sustains damage. It is an interesting point that the long back muscle is biomechanically linked in the main through the so-called fascia connection. These are sinuous plates which lie above the muscle system and provide a functional connection between the long back muscle and the buttocks muscle here, as well with the hamstrings here. In the same way, the long back muscle is connected with the upper arm via the broad back muscle, the musculus latissimus dorsi. To summarize, one can say that a horse carrying a rider and seen from the side clearly indicates whether it is